Hello. First, I want to thank everybody at the McCracken County Public Library, Bobby and Meredith, and the whole crew there. Like I said, it sort of takes a village to raise a child, but also to run a library. And everybody in the community is all part of that. And it's one of those things that I've been very lucky that the library for myself was a huge thing. I'm always in a huge debt to the librarians and the people who care for those tomes. It's very important, and people. I don't know. It's to me, library is my church. Let's just say that. And again, thank you very much. Um, as you heard, my name is Steve Asher. I am a writer. I am a folklorist, a bit of a local historian, and a paranormal researcher. What that more or less means is I look into different oddball type of situations, be it a supposed haunting, be it a haunted, scary place, be it something with a weird, unnatural occurrence that supposedly happened. Like we have an area called Gravity Hill, and just outside of Princeton, between that and Ediville, Kentucky, and supposedly it's one of those. You've heard the story before. Every little town has something, to where some bus or unfortunate thing happened in an underpass, and usually it involved kids, school kids or something. And if you put, your car on there, put some baby powder on it, it'll push itself by itself, and it has little handprints or something. Not saying that's real. I think people probably have disproved it as an optical illusion, and I'm sure handprints happen. Kids walking in between cars or whatnot, and the day before, you're not going to notice that. So anyway, I guess I should get right into it. Now, what you're looking at, this is actually an overview, like a fairly old overview of the Kentucky State Penitentiary. And now this is in Lyon County, Kentucky, and this particular site came online December 24th in 1890, Christmas Eve. Bummer, right? Here you are. Hey, what do you get for Christmas? Lots of convicts. So there it is. What's funny is originally it was called the Ediville Branch Penitentiary. Now, there was another facility known as the Kentucky State Penitentiary further up toward Frankfort. It later was changed. I believe it was 1912, and it was changed to the Kentucky State Penitentiary. As you can see, this is smack dab in the community. This is not so much where it's off out so far out in the county. This was almost a central hub. Everybody worked for there, had business there, farmers, whatever, bringing produce in and out, or they had family there. That it was in the penitentiary. My father had started there in the 50s as an officer and worked there for several years before moving on to police work and stuff. And my grandfather was actually in there in like the 30s for counterfeiting and bootlegging. So what you end up with when you have a writer and then a convict, you end up, or with an officer and then a convict, you end up with a writer. Sorry, but as you can see down in the front, a lot of that is water now, but there was actually a lot of inmate housing in the front, and that actually ended up getting pushed back, and it's not there anymore. So this is a pretty old picture, and as you can just take a look at some of the architecture, it's pretty menacing. A lot of people call it Castle in the Cumberland because that's the Cumberland River. Now, my particular involvement in this whole situation, I am a 10 years veteran of both corrections and law enforcement jailer work and such. And I walk these halls. I know these places. I have fought in them. I've helped people. I've did the most mundane and the most serious physical altercations with people as you could probably imagine. I won't get into, but it's a different animal. It literally is something of a battlefield. It's 99%, waiting, and then just a little bit of just madness. And then the madness could happen at any time. And this is why a lot of people weren't real great about this book coming out. It was a situation that some people did not necessarily want to see some of the stories put in here, and I was always respectful and try not to include names or any security issues. But it was funny. You have some people go, "Well, anybody could have wrote that book. Of course they could have. They surely could have, but they didn't." So, yay me! There I am. But anyway, I was very pleased at the response that most people had given to it, and continue to give the book because I try to handle it with the proper respect and hopefully, if you guys haven't read it yet, you will check it out because it's actually available through Permuted Press by way of Simon and Schuster, and you can find that online in bookstores pretty easily. Okay, this I'm sure you guys have seen something very similar in movies, Green Mile and whatnot. This electric chair, affectionately nicknamed Old Sparky, this was installed in Kentucky State Penitentiary mid to late September of 1910. And honestly, these photos do not do it justice. When you're in a small execution room, more or less a little bit bigger than a walk-in closet, there's a really grim feeling that comes over you if you've got any kind of heart to you at all. I had been in the room. I actually, yes, I sat in it. That was one of those things that they kind of test your metal and see who will sit it and who won't. And it was unnerving. It was extremely unnerving, and had an odd feeling all through the rest of the walk. It really felt like somebody was following you. I spoke to my guide and I said, "Hey, it's sort of an odd feeling." He goes, "Well, yeah, it's the heat or whatever kicks on." I said, "That's not what I'm talking about." And so he looked behind him and he kind of stepped in and said, "Yeah, yeah, there's that too." He said, "You'll get used to it or you won't stay, one or the other." And for whatever reason, I stayed for 10 years and learned a lot of stuff and saw a lot of very curious things. And I'll show you actually another part of the electric chair. This is the power board. And this is actually, like you see them go roll on one, roll on two, and all that. That's legitimate. And this is actually last I knew. Now it's been a few months since I've been in touch with my contacts at KSP, but this was still in what they call the KSP Museum, which was like the old warden's house next to KSP. I do not know with COVID. Unfortunately, they may not be doing any sort of tours, but it's there along with the floorboard. It was a long wooden board, so to make any sort of arcing contact with bolts in the floor, which was more or less pine, but it's been basically burnt black with a combination of surges and no other way of putting it, bodily fluids and whatnot, because it's you don't want to hear that. But that's one of the things that does happen. If you look at this next slide, this is the infamous skull cap. Now, this skull cap was actually kept in the warden's office safe for a while. Supposedly, I guess because people try to steal it, because there's a lot of people with really gruesome curiosities, and yeah, so there's that. But there had been stories that you would hear noises, muffled screams, and you would smell the smell of human flesh. Now, some of you may or may not know, but a lot of times there's a mask that goes on your head, and they cinch under your chin, partially to make sure the electrical current doesn't space out and arc against the skull. That way, it's just a straight line through them. But also the cinch kind of keeps their mouths from opening and screaming and all that. Sorry, I know it's a bit gruesome, but this is the subject matter, and this is why a lot of people do believe that they would see shadows in and around the captain's office, where it was like they're jerking, almost from like a seizure. I had worked the front gate, which is more or less the Walmart greeter area of KSP, and you would have people come in and out, and I worked there a lot, and there was strange times over the weekend that you would just catch really odd smells, and it was unnerving. But this was all part of some of the brutal history of KSP, and I'm gonna show you a little bit more. Don't know how many of you guys have seen movies like Cool Hand Luke and some of those old school prison movies, but there's a item. It kind of looks like an outhouse, the way it was, but this is what they call a sweat box. Some people call them hot boxes. They paint them black or whatever, or they call them man breakers, and there's a reason for that. Very little ventilation, very little. I mean, obviously, no contact. No one was allowed to get within so many feet, or they would be whipped or whatever. Now, this is early times. Okay, things have changed a little bit, but this is back when it was pretty brutal. And often these guys would stand up, unable to sit, and it would work on their mind. It was about penance. This was not to make them better people. It was to make them get in line. And A lot of times these guys would harm women or children early on in the penitentiary. There were mixed classes and mixed custodies. It was wonky, but they would often defecate or urinate, whatever, pass out from heat stroke. They'd have to drag them out and take them straight to the infirmary. It unfortunately is part of that history. And moreover than not, as we were talking about old Sparky, there was other times when it was even darker than that. Okay, now as you see here, this is talks about the triple execution in state prison at Eddyville, and now this says makes the third time since electric chair installed that a triple execution has been staged. Now, a lot of men met their ends by riding the lightning at the penitentiary. Now, Kentucky is part of a handful of states that still employ the electric chair as part of a choice that for those grandfathered in. See, there was a law that made after a certain point you had to do lethal injection, but there are actually some inmates who chose to sit in Sparky. There's a lot of people who felt that there was some sort of paranormal connection between the use of electricity. All the courts that was used in the penitentiary walls, which was actually all done by the inmates themselves. Even some people supposedly dying in the construction and being in the wall where they're pouring concrete 5, 6 levels high into narrow spaces. And some of the inmates supposedly fell, slipped, pushed. I don't know, but supposedly some were still in the walls. That I cannot verify. Again, these are the stories that I received from different people. But it was a situation where Jesse Buchanan, now this was a really big warden, very strong warden in that area. He had actually, in 17 years, he had 51 men put to death in it. 51 men, that's a lot, And that shows you the mood of the place and the fact that there are still people that report smelling cigar smoke, you know, coming back and forth from, say, the commissary or between the captain's office when no one's there. I've smelled that. This is not during a storm. There wasn't anything like that. It was just clear weather. No one's outside. The doors wasn't open. Dead of winter. Could have no explanation possibly, but it's still pretty odd, and sort of sets the tone for some of the other stuff I'm fixing to show you. Okay, as you can see, there's a lot of weapons employed at KSP. It was a situation where I got to learn a lot of old timers, granddaddies they call them, of the walks, and they knew my interest in the history, and they knew, I was something of a folklorist and a historian, and these people were able to tell me about some of the ways things were handled. And I'd asked one old timer about some of the weapons, and they said, I won't say this, but hypothetically, I'm within about 5 steps of a weapon outside of myself. So that's how you have to live here. And this is in like the 90s up through the 2000s when I was talking to these guys. And if you look at the board, these are an example of various type of weapons, knives, sieves. A lot of times people would call them pig stickers, kind of a derogatory term, but there it is. And these were all discovered at, around, under KSP. Rarely they were found on people because most people were slick enough to know that they had to hide them. And some of these were even used in murders. I would go sweeping with a metal detector at times and come across certain items, come across pieces of fence, wire, like thicker gauge, bent over, wrapped up, sharpened against concrete. That was the thing you really watched out for. You didn't watch out for weapons. You watched out for the sounds of scraping concrete. It's not because they're breaking out. It's because they're making weapons. And if you hear that a couple, 3 times a week, you knew trouble was coming. And there's been a lot of reports too. Again, throughout there's a place called the Yard Office, which is a central hub for the activities, canteen, doctor visits, visitation, all that. So also hospital. But a lot of those places would report hearing, again, screams, shadows, things like that. It just was what it was. Also, in the other picture to the side of that, this is a soap gun. It's a little bit different from a zip gun, which is sort of a improvised pistol. But this was one made, I believe, from some strips of fabric soaked in toothpaste and then padded out with toilet paper around it, which if you dry out toilet paper, if anybody's been to high school and threw paper up the ceiling, it stays there forever. So once this gets hammered out and you can get the basic shape, pretty much looks like a gun. And, middle of the night, poke at somebody's ribs, they're gonna let you out. So this is why this is such a hotbed for paranormal activity, because people died all the time. And it sounds, I don't know, maybe a little bit overdone by saying it, but it's just true. And the people who worked there were hard. They were sometimes as hard as the convicts because they had to be. You take on your environment to survive, or you don't stay long. And speaking of some of the workers, now this is an early image from the front of KSP. This is way back. They don't have the glass doors there. They don't have the walkway coming across for one wall stand, which was directly in front of these double doors at this point. Now, the doors there are two big, great oak doors, heavy doors, like siege doors you see in like Lord of the Rings or something, with the battering rams in it. And these are actually in the upper part of the what is now the admin building, because everything has 3 to 4 different lives at KSP. You butter and cut a slice of bread 6 ways. I always heard them say you make something go until you can't make it work anymore, and that's very true with this area, because this all connected in with other areas of the penitentiary that was earlier. We had 1 and 2 cell house, and at that time that's all they needed, and then later it went on to 3, and then 4, 5, 6, now 7 cell house, which has a new death house next to it. And in this next slide, I'm going to show you 1 and 2 cell house. Now, as you can see, there's a gentleman standing in front of that. I believe it's an officer. This is actually, it was hard to get. A lot of these early pictures, it's almost impossible to find, as some of the ones I'm going to show you here in a minute, where it was impossible. But if you notice on the doors, it has a sort of a lattice design. It's the old latticed metal stapled or riveted doors. All these doors swung on. There was iron, and they all swung on iron hinges. Every single one of them had to be opened by hand, and that was a situation which is very dangerous. Nowadays, they have it to where you can open them quicker, and if you have to get some people out, you have an automatic, which it should pop in what they call the control center. But there's been times when they didn't have that, and people burnt to death. It happens, especially in the wild and woolly days of early KSP. And you know, I had people talked about, they're surprised the ground isn't still wet from all the blood that's spilled on it. And I believe it. I've been in spots that have felt extremely off, extremely off. And I'm going to show you guys something. You're actually the first people to see this. And this is a gentleman that there's a big ghost story about. I actually wrote several books, and I wrote 2 about KSP. And the second KSP book has a story about this gentleman that I'm fixing to show you in this next slide. Now, this guy, kind of an unassuming guy, looks like might be a friend of your uncle's, a bowling buddy, something like that. Maybe he's here to move some furniture, help you with that carburetor part at O'Reilly's or something. But this is Mr. James Kelly Moss. He was convicted of willful murder. Now, this was of his stepfather, Charles Abbott, in his home county. Now, this man was a 74-year-old man. He was killed in his kitchen on Cumnock Street. It said that Mr. Moss was found outside the edge of town, hiding in an outhouse. The guy had no memory, he said, of the murder. He had been basically one of those "you're not my dad" situations, but like put in a lot of alcohol and rage issues. So he'd been a holy terror to that town and his mother and stepfather for a long time. That's public record. But this is the only picture, and this took me going through Frankfurt and to get this picture. So there it is. Enjoy that. This guy to the chair. Okay, going to the chair. This is actually his death jacket, and shows who the courts, his crimes, and even down at the bottom where it says death by electric chair, and it gives the date of 3/2/62. And he swore up and down that he wasn't guilty of it. He said, "I've done a lot of bad things, but this ain't one of them," and more or less swore revenge on the prison. And he said he would haunt that place till the last brick fell. Well, the bricks are still there, and supposedly the spirit of Kelly Moss is still there. There was a report from one of the wall stands. You usually have in the front, there's one, then you go to the left, two, three, four, five, six, and just goes all the way around. And at two wall stand, which is in the back of three cell house, which is a segregation unit for anybody from just people who did like pretty heinous stuff, jumping on other officers, trying to rape other inmates. There's a cutter's walk, and there's just a lot of wild times in three cell house. I've had a lot of interesting conversations and interactions in three cell house. But in two stand, there was a gentleman. I'll just call him Mac, an officer Mac, and he was sitting up there, and it was late, and he saw somebody in the back in behind where the old gymnasium was at three cell house. Now there's an area called a run, and this is where officers come to check to make sure no one's throwing anything from the streets out to the convicts, or there's nobody been working on the fences trying to get out because people break out of prison. He was sitting there and he saw somebody and he couldn't quite make it out what color their clothes were, and he was just walking around like he was, he was supposed to be there, and so he was watching and he was trying to get his light to come on, and at first his light wouldn't really work, and when he did, he finally got it on there. The guy turned around, big old grin on his face, looked up, gave him a wave, and he stepped back into the shadow and he was gone. Well, of course, this set off alarms in his head. He automatically calls three cell house. Hey, do you have someone back here? What do you mean? Do you have somebody checking the runs? No, we finished up and just sent the chow truck back, which was affectionately called Blinky because the lights hardly ever worked on it. I said, no, we just sent Blinky out. And he said, why? He says, there's someone back there. So they walked, they looked around, this and that, didn't find anything. All the locks on the fences were in good shape. There was no tampering of the fences. Well, due to this happening, the officer had to go to the cab's office and explain what he saw. So after his shift change was over, he went in to talk to the captain. And what happened there was he explained to him that he saw this weird thing, and the guy described what he looked like, said he had kind of khaki looking outfit, or bluish looking outfit. Sorry. It was back when they were wearing blue. So the captain said, give me a second, son. Pulls out this big book. He's flipping through stuff. And said, look at this page. Do you see anybody that fits that description? Rows and rows of different inmates. He slid his finger down. He said, that's him. That's the guy. So, are you sure? That guy said, yeah. He got the same shaped head. That's him. He said, that's Kelly Moss. He said, Kelly Moss. Yeah, the guy down the electric chair, that's Kelly Moss. Because very few people ever saw his picture. And so the officer said, I don't, he says, here's what we're going to do. We didn't have this conversation. This is squashed. This sort of things you're going to see here. You're going to see things, you're going to hear things. Sometimes things, you might even feel something touch you or something fly past you. Welcome to KSP. And they did not ever speak of it again. This is the final resting place of Kelly Moss. Out of respect for the family, I'm not going to say where it's at. If you're curious about it, you can probably find it. Obviously, I feel bad for the family. A connection to a famous haunting. It is what it is. It's not sort of legacy I want for my child, but there's a lot of secrets and strange things beneath the ground at KSP, and even stranger things out front. What you're seeing here this is old Edible. This is circa about 1900, maybe a little bit before that. And this was a very up and coming area. It had a lot of commerce. It had a lot of interactions with bigger cities. They had, their own pharmacies and stores and courthouses and all that. If anyone is familiar with like LBL and some of the old towns in LBL that were eventually abandoned and or flooded out when they ran TVA through here, same thing pretty much happened with edible. It was a deal where progress marches on. And unfortunately, they were one of the victims of said progress. What you're seeing right here is the fact that the town ended up being flooded by the damming of the Cumberland River at Barkley Dam. And any of you from this area are very familiar with that area, but it was the death knell for Old Edible. That's why there's Old Edible and just Edible now. The remains of the city, what wasn't washed away and whatnot, or that people could carry off before the waters got too high, lay under the water. You sometimes on a clear day, the waters are low enough, you can see the foundations of some old buildings, sometimes partial pieces of pipe or brickwork from furnaces and whatnot, even roads. And one of the reports were that not everybody made it out, that some people were, just like now in desperate times, resorted to theft and things of that nature. And there were some young men who thought they knew of some people had some stuff stored away, and they thought, well, they ain't going to use it, I'm going to get it. And off they went. And they were down in there, and it was already about mid calf level. So these boys walked up into this house. Nothing. It was gone. So it was getting darker as they're trying to be inconspicuous. So they get up into this place and they walk up with a flashlight, like an old Coleman or something like that. They're walking around. Most of the downstairs is cleaned out. It's gone. Well, they're kind of disappointed. And one boy's like, this water's getting pretty high. We need to get out of here. It's getting to the bottom of the first steps. No. I'm walking out of here with something. So off he goes. He goes through looking this and that, most of everything, so a few dresses, trinkets, just nothing. Well, he goes up and tries to get into the attic. It takes him a while, and he's forcing this lock, trying to get into this attic. Now, the one boy can hear the water coming up pretty good up the steps. Like it's within about 4 feet of the first floor. He says, look, we're gonna get stuck. The boy said, calm down, we'll go outside the front window of the second story. Don't worry about it. Well, the one boy said, I'm calm. It ain't worth it. I'm gone. He gets down, swims out through the front door, never to be seen again, right? He takes off. The one boy finally pushes his way into the attic, and he does find a few things. Supposedly found some mason jars with silver coins in it, whatnot. But by the time he dug all that out at the rear part of it, he looks down, and the second story is already flooding. Now he's looking around. He's trying to pop a hole through the brickwork to get out of the chimney. It's not happening. He sees a place where, I guess, the vent, the bathroom. He starts banging on it, laying on his back, kicking with his feet, anything he can do. And apparently, toward the end, he was able to bust open a piece of ceiling board as he could see the water come splashing through. Now, the story is this, and I've not ever seen this personally, but I could have sworn I've seen some oddball lights before in the water. Some people say if you catch it on the right nights, you'll see SOS, dot, 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 being flashed through the water. And supposedly the boy died and was swept out, probably out to the dam. So only he and the catfish know for sure. Now, this is the exterior of the modern Kentucky State Penitentiary. And as you see, it does definitely have what you would call a castle vibe to it. This is actually modeled on the Joliet prison from Joliet, Illinois penitentiary, which definitely had a vibe to it as well. And a lot of the activities, like off of the catwalk and stuff like that, you usually hear people walking up and things like that, and walking under the steps, because under the steps is where the inmate entrance used to be. And this is back in the days when a lot of times they would have maybe say I don't know any other way of putting it, because it's 1800s, they would have the white inmates go up the top and the black and non-whites go under the bottom. And you would hear sometimes people shuffling, you might hear chains. It could be from something else. It could have totally been from something else. But Last time I checked, there wasn't chains under there. So that was extremely odd. This was actually put together by stonemasons. Again, as I mentioned before, they did use inmate labor. So it's just every brick, every slab, every foot of dirt was had inmate misery in it. And that's not to say these boys weren't deserving of some of their punishment, but I would hate to think of anybody stuck in a facility forever and ever, especially a penitentiary. That's certainly not where I'd want to be. Now, this place is totally encircled by a series of walls, a series of fences, barbed wire. And as you see in this next photo, the prison has grown over the years. If you look in behind that, several rows of fencing. There's an area called PI that is down by a 5 wall stand. And that's prison industries, where a lot of times they would make clothes for the state and various things on site. And that's how they make some of their money. A lot of times they will have them working in the kitchen, working there, working in the yard crew, working in there, driving forklifts around. It's like any other job, but it's a prison. And it gives these guys some semblance of normality. Like I said, things have changed a little bit since the hot box days. And, you know, even around the time I started, people would take missteps downstairs and things. It is what it is. But thank God there's more cameras around, not just to protect officers or inmates, but to verify things happening or not happening. But as I mentioned, 2 rows of fencing in between that, what they call ankle breaker rocks, and that is 100% true. You go trying to run across that, it's going to get you. Which I'm sort of at the age now, I go walking across a graveled road or something, you think I got shot. But these guys, I guess it's better than sitting in prison, so they took the chance at it. But another thing I want to show you in this next slide is about another one of the books I wrote. Now, as you can see, this is called Hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum. Okay. That's not me being ugly, as my grandma would say, but that is the physical name of what is now known as Western State in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. The Western Lunatic Asylum was more or less come online around 1854. All this is, around Civil War times and whatnot. And there was a lot of, they would get robbed. They would totally get robbed. And these people were already in a mental facility. And from anything from murder, suicide, depression. This is back in the days when like female hysteria was a thing, and they would just push you off. They didn't want to do anything. They sent you to Western State, and it was dark times, very dark times, and there had been reports of people going in and meeting really brutal ends. And one of the stories, if you look to the picture just to the right of on this same slide, if you look close, hopefully you can see it. There is a misty grayish outline coming down the spiral staircase. And this is what is known as the Gray Lady. And this woman is seen from time to time. Some people say she's almost like a banshee, usually around bad times when something happens or something's going to happen, or almost like a death. I don't know if it's got to do with just some kind of Celtic belief and carrying on from people settling from the Welsh areas and into Appalachia, slowly moving out west. I know a lot of my background, my forebears from Appalachian mountains and whatnot, and we carried a lot of those traditions and ghost stories and whatnot with us, and a lot of the superstitions too. I definitely will knock on wood, but there have been people willfully allowed themselves to burn to death. There's been people who were hung that shouldn't have been able to be hung. There was nowhere to hang themselves in there. People, just horrible, horrible things. And people have been picked up and thrown by unseen forces there. This has been seen by staff and people having, like, there for alcohol counseling or something. These were people that were at their cells. And what you have to understand, all the stories I have here are all rooted in an actual occurrence. Okay, be it something they saw or I saw. Now, I've never been in Western State. Don't count me out. The day is young. But as of now, I've not been in Western State. But this is all staff, current, retired, and or their families. And that is where I jump into my next book, The Hauntings of the St. Vincent's Academy. St. Vincent's was, I guess it technically still is, but it's no longer a facility for that nature. Was a basically an adult special needs care unit, and this area housed people from like 18 to 90. It didn't matter. But in the early days, as I understand it, the St. Vincent's Academy had been everything from a home for wayward mothers to troubled teens to this and that. And the picture that you see here has to do with a photo of an investigation that I was a part of. I have a team, the Caldwell County Paranormals, and we investigate different places. And if you actually look down this hall, running along the left wall, there's a little small square. And if you look real close, there's something odd. It looks like a pair of eyes. And I'm actually going to go to the next slide where I think you can see it a little bit better. Okay, a friend of mine had actually enhanced this and had his little trademark on it. So if you look, there's a pair of eyes that stare out from basically an abandoned medical cart. Now, when I had spoke to the person who had accompanied us to the location, because we never investigated here without permission. We had found this spot, and I said, "This is really odd," because we do a walkthrough before everything. Everything's locked. There's not a soul in it, and there were no animals. There was no nothing. But this is huge, and it looked like more like a human body shape. When I spoke to the woman, I'll use the name Ryan, and she said, "Oh my God, it looks like Ryan." I said, "Who is Ryan?" And this was a resident who used to play hide and go seek, like a little child, and they get behind the couch and they look over, they put their hands, says, "You can't see me." He was simple, very simple. So, and he would do that, and he would kind of go boo when the people would come out with the food trays, and they'd laugh, you got me. And apparently, they believe that a part of his spirit is still there. I would hate to think I would be stuck there in a situation, but I would rather be in a happy moment and a happy memory. But it was very strange. There was a lot of weird stuff that happened at that area, a lot of shadows. I got a lot of recordings. I had an EVP, and I was in one area that was nicer. And I asked, I said, whose office is this? And this is, all old, early Catholic settlements. And you could it almost sounded like an older Irish fella. And he said, "This is the Father's building." But he said it like, "This is the Father's building." And it still literally gives me goosebumps. It was so freaky, but it was a great experience. And we got to learn a lot about that location and the history of the place. So we were very lucky. What you're looking at here is actually the cover for my book, Short Stories for Darker Nights. And this is this along with the Hauntings of the excuse me, the St. Vincent's Academy is all available on Amazon, or you can go to my webpage. This is all lowercase and together, steveasher.com. So it's like Steve with an extra E, Asher.com. And it gives you links to this. It also gives you links to my podcast, which is House of Asher, which is available on Spreaker and all podcast things, also on YouTube. But this is a collection of more or less it's a love note to all the stories I loved as a kid, all the writers that got me hooked, guys like Algernon Blackwood, B.F. Benson, M.R. James, of course, Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, all those guys. Even Charles Dickens, some of the spooky stories. I mean, Christmas story, A Christmas Carol was a ghost story, for gosh sakes. But, this has stories about everything from monsters, dark fae, and things like that, Lovecraftian horror. And like I said, it's a love note to the guys who turned me on to the world of the curious and supernatural. Now, this is from Curious Counties from Kentucky. Dang strange and mostly true tales. And again, some of this I could not verify. It was just take it for what it is, good campfire stories. Now, there's a chapter in here. In the first book, I went alphabetical. There's 2 books, 60 chapters in each. There's a chapter about Adair County, talks about boys by the last name of White. And around January 30th, 1878, they were out hunting and ran into a really strong blizzard. Good ways from home, and they ended up having to stay into a cavern, and they come across these huge giants. 8 to 9. Some said 12 foot tall. They all had shields. They all had long swords next to them. Finally, they were able to dig out and reported this to their families. And Ancient American magazine actually touched on these sites. So there's a little validity to that. And there's people who have supposedly found giant skeletons all over the world in various things that supposedly aren't possible. So that leaves you with a thing: is the paranormal just something we haven't discovered yet? Makes you wonder. And here we are. We're pretty much at the end of the dance. If you guys have some questions, comments, whatnot, please lay it on me. I try to answer the best I can. And if I just don't know, I won't lie to you unless you want me to. But I'll try to give you as honest an answer as I can.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. Somebody asked what that last picture was of a skeleton.
Yes, it was. I'm so sorry.
Here.
Yeah, that is a yes. It sure is. This is from an area, I believe, in Syria. Now, understand too, it's it's so funny because a lot of times they would find these type of skeletons in like red ochre. A lot of the primitive, cavemen or whatever, early man had did this to protect bones. And but then you would also hear stories where they were laid out very ornately and whatnot. Sometimes you would see other smaller groups of more humanoid sized skeletons around these, but they would have markings on them. And people researched them and said these look like primitive cut marks. So are they cannibals? I mean, you can go to different texts, even biblical texts, touch on a little bit about, the giants with 2 rows of teeth, and supposedly they had found skeletons. I'm not a theologian. I'm just making some different references. But yep, that's a big old skeleton right there.
Somebody asked, can you describe again what a gravity hill is? Are they in other places too?
Well, possibly. I know there's a lot of places where they talk about railroad tracks and things like that. There's a thing called ley lines. Now, you just starting to get in touch more metaphysical areas by talking about it, but there it is. Ley lines. A lot of times, temples and places like that would be built on supposedly energy grids, spots where the energy is much stronger, where like there's just a stronger connection to the mystical. And this supposedly is such a place just outside of Princeton. Like I said, you come in Highway 62 from Ediville to Princeton, and you turn down there. I believe it's Crider Delaney Road. Now, please be respectful because these people live in this area, and please don't mark it up, paint it up, stuff that happens, and the city has to spend a lot of time fixing that. So, if you go there, some people want to turn their lights off. I'm telling you, don't do that at night because you might get hit. You do what you want to, but I'm telling you, don't do that. But even if you just put it in neutral, you will feel it, and it's really strange because when it takes off, you feel it. If you don't put on your brakes at the stop sign before you get back on Highway 62, you'll go bumping over the top of that road and into a field of trees, and you don't want to do that. So yeah, there are other places that have this sort of similar background. Different places that are full of energy. There's a place in the Curious Counties, Kentucky, Part Two that I'm writing about, known as Middlesboro, Kentucky, and it's actually in the center of a caldera, which is a large meteor strike. It's actually the town where Lee Majors, who played Steve Austin from $6 Million Man, was born from. And they have something called striated quartz. And striated quartz is created when either a volcano or something with a lot of pressure and a lot of mass ignites. You'll find this type of stuff, just like diamonds form in volcanoes, right? But there's a very odd quartz, and it has really strong communicative qualities, like the old quartz radios. But it's like a supercharged quartz, and it's really rare. And people say because of that, there is stronger mystical energies there. It draws in different sort of things. I mean, you want to get into Bigfoot, that's probably a whole nother conversation. But people say a lot of mystical creatures are drawn to that area. So yeah, there's all kinds of weird things in Kentucky, more than I ever knew. I probably should mention while we're waiting for that. For those who are right there in the McCracken County area, in the second Kentucky Counties book, which that should be coming out hopefully the end of this year, the start of next year, has a story about one of the old mercantile places, for like a clothing store. They had a local woman. I think I may have put her name in the book. I'm sorry, it escapes me. I've slept since I wrote that. But she agreed for a certain amount of money to be mesmerized. This is back in the day. I don't know why I did that, but there it is. Mesmerized and stood in a window of a store. And she did this for like, supposed to done it for like a 24-hour period and whatnot. And then they did that and they took her to, I think, the local movie theater. And she stood out front, obviously with people watching her, but stood out front as sort of an attraction to come see the movie or whatever. And the man who was doing the mesmerizing had fallen ill that night. And it took, I believe, several days to get him there to be able to give her the off button for that. And she basically got very highly dehydrated and had to go to the hospital. And I don't think the woman ever went to another hypnotist again. But that's all right down there, I believe, on Broadway. So again, you walk by stores and places, you never know the history of it.
All right, we have one other question. Somebody would like to know if there is more than one wooden electric chair at KSP.
As far as I know, you mean like uh like a first aisle and a second aisle, like like a McDonald's or something? No, I mean one's enough. And when they did, especially now, it's very, very, literally act of Congress stuff because it's life and death, literally. But as far as I know, there's that chair which they keep on reserve, and then they also have the death house, the new death house by Seven Cell House, which is a lethal injection room. And as of now, until they come up with another, whatever, more humane way to kill somebody, which is sort of an oxymoron that's humanely kill you. But right now, that's what it is. And probably once the last grandfathered in person takes that walk or shuffles off this mortal coil in one way or the other, that will probably end up being sent to State Kentucky Museum, I'm assuming. And I don't know if it's in Lexington or Frankfurt. I apologize for not knowing that. But if one day it will hopefully meet its end and not take anybody else down. Anytime. Thank you guys again for having me. It's been a blast. I love visiting Paducah whenever I can to come up there and stuff. I have a lot of friends in the Paducah area, and thank you guys for welcoming me and being so hospitable.